Invisible Strings. Chapter 1. Parallel Lives. Lucas van der Meer lived in a quiet neighborhood near the canal in Utrecht. His house was old, with tall windows and wooden floors that creaked when he walked. He had lived there for many years, first with his wife, and now alone. After her death, the rooms felt colder, even in summer. He kept everything in order. His books were lined up neatly, his desk was always clean, and his drawings were stacked in perfect piles. Lucas worked as an architect. He designed buildings, mostly public spaces like schools and libraries. He was good at his job, but he didn't enjoy it the way he used to. He worked from home and rarely went out unless it was for meetings. He spoke only with colleagues and kept conversations short. People said he was polite but distant. He didn't mind. He felt safer that way. Emma Reynolds lived across the city in a small apartment above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread filled her kitchen every morning. She had moved to Utrecht from England 5 years earlier, hoping for a fresh start. She worked as an illustrator, drawing pictures for children's books. Her drawings were full of color and imagination, animals that talked, trees that danced, and stars that sang. But lately, her hands felt heavy. Her ideas didn't come easily. She stared at blank pages for hours. She felt tired, not just in her body, but in her heart. She didn't know why. She walked through the city almost every day, hoping to find something that would spark her creativity again. She visited parks, sat by the canal, and watched people pass by. She liked the quiet streets and the way the light reflected on the water. But nothing seemed to help. Lucas and Emma didn't know each other. They had never met. But their lives moved through the same places. Lucas sometimes walked to the canal in the early morning, just to clear his mind. Emma passed the same canal in the afternoon, looking for new shapes and colors. Lucas bought coffee from a small cafe near the library. Emma often sat at the same cafe with her sketchbook, drawing the people around her. They used the same tram line. They stood at the same stops. They crossed the same bridges. But they never noticed each other. Lucas liked silence. He listened to classical music while he worked. He didn't keep a television in his living room. He read books about design and history. He missed his wife, but he didn't talk about her. Her photo stood on a shelf near his desk. He looked at it sometimes, but not for long. He didn't cry. He just felt a quiet emptiness. Emma liked soft sounds too. She listened to jazz and old French songs. She kept her radio low and her windows open. She had no pets, no partner, and no close family nearby. She had friends, but she didn't see them often. She felt like something was missing, but she couldn't name it. Both of them were searching, in different ways. Lucas searched for peace. Emma searched for meaning. They didn't know that their paths were already connected. They didn't know that the places they visited, the streets they walked, and the moments they felt most alone were shared. Invisible strings were already pulling them closer. Not with force, but with quiet steps. Not with noise, but with small signs. Lucas once left a sketchbook on a bench near the canal. Emma sat on that bench the next day and saw the book. She opened it and saw drawings of buildings, lines and shapes that felt familiar. She didn't know who had made them, but she felt something. She left the book where she found it. Lucas returned later and picked it up. He noticed a small flower pressed between the pages. He didn't know who had placed it there, but he smiled. Emma once dropped a note in the library, a quote she had written to inspire herself. Lucas found it near the architecture section. He read the words and kept the note in his wallet. He didn't know who wrote it, but it stayed with him. They didn't meet. They didn't speak. But something was already happening. Something quiet. Something real. Their lives were parallel, but not separate. They were moving toward each other, step by step, without knowing it. And one day, those invisible strings would pull them into the same moment. A moment that would change everything. Chapter 2. Unseen Coincidences. Lucas van der Meer received a new project from the city council. It was a renovation of the old public library in Utrecht. The building was beautiful but needed care. The walls were cracked, the windows were dusty, and the children's section had not been updated in years. Lucas liked working with old buildings. He believed they had stories inside their walls. He spent hours studying the original plans and walking through the empty rooms. He made notes, took photos, and imagined how the space could feel warm again. He wanted the library to be quiet but alive, a place where people could think and dream. Emma Reynolds was contacted by a local publisher who worked with the library. They wanted her to decorate the children's section with new illustrations. The idea was to create a space full of color and imagination, where children could read and play. Emma was happy to accept the offer. She had been waiting for a project that felt meaningful. She visited the library with her sketchbook and looked at the walls, the corners, and the shelves. She imagined animals climbing the books, stars floating above the tables, and trees growing from the floor. She felt excited, but also nervous. Her creativity had been quiet for months, and she hoped this project would wake it up. Lucas and Emma both visited the library often, but never at the same time. Lucas came early in the morning, when the building was empty and the light was soft. He liked the silence and the way the sun touched the old wood. Emma came in the afternoon, when the rooms were warmer and the sounds of the city came through the windows. She liked the feeling of movement and the smell of books. They passed through the same doors, walked on the same floors, and looked at the same walls. But they never met. One morning, Lucas noticed a drawing on the wall near the children's section. It was a small sketch of a fox reading a book under a tree. The lines were soft, and the colors were gentle. He didn't know who had drawn it, but it felt familiar. Something about the fox reminded him of a story his wife used to read. He stood there for a moment, thinking about the past. He didn't know that Emma had drawn it the day before. Emma returned the next day and saw a model of the building placed near the entrance. It was part of Lucas's design. The model showed the new layout, with open spaces and curved walls. Emma looked at it and felt something strange. She had seen this shape before, but not in real life. It reminded her of a dream she had years ago, where she walked through a building that felt like a maze but also like home. She didn't know who had made the model, but it stayed in her mind. Both Lucas and Emma felt a quiet pull toward these details. They didn't understand why. They didn't know that the things they noticed were created by each other. But something inside them responded. Lucas started spending more time near the children's section. He didn't say why, but he liked being there. Emma began drawing more animals under trees. She didn't plan it, but the fox kept appearing. They were still strangers. They didn't speak. But the library became a place where their thoughts met. Their work touched each other without words. Lucas added a small bench near the window, thinking it would be a good place for someone to sit and draw. Emma found the bench and used it every time she came. She didn't know it was new. She just felt comfortable there. Unseen coincidences continued. Lucas found a paper with a quote written in pencil. It said, "Imagination is the quiet voice of hope." He kept it in his notebook. Emma had written it weeks before and left it by accident. Emma saw a sketch of a tree in the renovation plans. It looked like the one she had drawn in her childhood journal. She didn't know Lucas had designed it based on a memory. Their lives were still separate, but the library was slowly connecting them. Not with meetings or conversations, but with small signs. Invisible strings were pulling them closer. They didn't notice the pattern yet. But they felt something changing. Something quiet, something real. And soon, those coincidences would become something more. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. Lucas van der Meer visited the library early one morning. The building was quiet, with only the sound of soft footsteps and pages turning. He liked coming before the crowds arrived. It gave him time to think and observe. That day, he walked to the history section and picked up a book about old Dutch buildings. He opened it slowly, enjoying the feel of the paper. As he turned the pages, a small note slipped out and landed on the floor. He picked it up and read the words written in soft pencil. The handwriting was gentle, almost like a whisper. The note said, "Even the smallest light can guide you through the darkest room." Lucas paused. He didn't know who had written it, but the message stayed with him. It reminded him of something his wife used to say. He folded the note and placed it in his coat pocket. He didn't know that Emma Reynolds had written it months earlier and left it inside the book for someone to find. Emma had a habit of leaving small notes in books. She believed that words could help people feel less alone. She never signed them. She just wrote what she felt and hoped someone would read them at the right time. She didn't know who would find them, but she liked the idea of quiet connection. She had written that particular note during a rainy afternoon when she felt lost in her own thoughts. She had walked to the library, sat near the window, and wrote the line before placing it inside a book that looked forgotten. Later that week, Emma visited an art exhibit in the city. It was a small event showing local architecture and design. She walked through the rooms slowly, looking at models and sketches. One project caught her attention. It was a design for a public library. The lines were clean, the spaces open, and the light carefully placed. She stood in front of the drawing and felt something familiar. She didn't know the architect, but the style spoke to her. It felt like someone who understood silence and space. She read the name, Lucas van der Meer. She didn't recognize it, but the feeling stayed. Emma returned to the library the next day and asked the staff about the renovation. They told her the architect was working on the plans and sometimes visited in the mornings. She didn't ask for more. She didn't want to seem curious. But she started coming earlier, hoping to see him. Lucas also began noticing small changes. A new drawing on the wall. A flower left on the bench. A book placed carefully on the table. He didn't know who was behind these things, but he felt someone nearby. They started searching for each other, not with questions, but with quiet steps. Lucas began leaving his sketchbook open on the table, hoping someone would look. Emma began writing new notes and placing them in different sections. She chose words that felt honest, not dramatic. She wrote about hope, about light, about finding peace in small things. Lucas found another note one morning. It said, "Some paths are not straight, but they still lead you home." He smiled and kept it. Emma saw another model of the library in a different part of the exhibit. This one showed the children's section, with curved walls and soft colors. She felt like she had seen it before, maybe in a dream or a memory. She didn't know that Lucas had designed it based on a story his wife used to tell. He wanted the space to feel like a safe place, like a hug made of wood and light. They didn't speak. They didn't meet. But they felt each other. They felt the presence of someone who understood. Someone who moved through the same spaces with the same quiet heart. The shadows of the past were still there, but they didn't feel heavy. They felt like signs. Like pieces of a puzzle slowly coming together. Lucas walked through the library and felt less alone. Emma sat by the canal and felt more calm. They didn't know each other's names, but they knew something was happening. Something soft, something real. The invisible strings between them were growing stronger. Not with noise, but with silence. Not with words, but with feeling. And soon, those shadows would lead them into the light. Chapter 4. The Critical Moment. It was a cold morning in Utrecht. The sky was gray, and the wind moved gently through the narrow streets. Emma Reynolds left her apartment early. She had a meeting at the library and wanted to stop by the canal first. She rode her bicycle slowly, enjoying the quiet. Her sketchbook was in her bag, and her thoughts were full of new ideas. For the first time in weeks, she felt inspired. She had started drawing again, and her heart felt lighter. Lucas van der Meer also left his house that morning. He had a meeting with the city council about the final plans for the library renovation. He walked through the city with his coat buttoned and his hands in his pockets. He liked walking instead of driving. It gave him time to think. He passed the canal and looked at the water. It reminded him of his wife, who used to sit there and read. He didn't feel sad. He felt calm. As Emma turned onto a narrow street near the canal, a car came too fast around the corner. She tried to stop, but her bicycle slipped on the wet pavement. She fell hard and hit her head. Her bag flew to the side, and her sketchbook landed near the curb. The car stopped, and the driver called for help. Lucas, who was just a few steps away, saw the accident and ran over. He didn't know who the woman was, but he felt something strong inside him. He knelt beside her and checked her breathing. She was unconscious but alive. Lucas stayed with Emma until the ambulance arrived. He picked up her bag and sketchbook and held her hand gently. He didn't speak. He just stayed close. The paramedics came and took her to the hospital. Lucas followed quietly. He didn't know why, but he couldn't leave. He sat in the waiting room for hours, holding her things and thinking about the strange feeling in his chest. Emma woke up in a hospital bed. Her head hurt, and her body felt weak. She looked around and saw a man sitting near the door. He looked tired but peaceful. She didn't know his name, but his face felt familiar. She had seen him before, maybe in a dream or in a moment she couldn't remember. Lucas stood up and walked to her slowly. He didn't know what to say, but he felt something real. Emma looked at him and smiled. She felt safe. They began to talk. Slowly, carefully. Emma asked about her bag, and Lucas gave it to her. She opened the sketchbook and saw a pressed flower inside. It was the same flower she had left on the bench weeks ago. Lucas said he had found it and kept it. Emma felt her heart beat faster. She showed him a note she had written and left in a book. Lucas pulled the same note from his coat pocket. They looked at each other and understood. All the small signs, all the quiet moments, they were not random. They were invisible strings pulling them together. The drawings, the quotes, the places, the feelings. Everything had led to this moment. Emma felt tears in her eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. Lucas felt warmth in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. They didn't rush. They didn't make promises. But they knew something had changed. The accident was not just a moment of danger. It was a moment of truth. A moment that opened their eyes to what had always been there. They were not strangers anymore. They were two lives that had moved side by side, waiting for the right time to meet. Lucas stayed with Emma for the next few days. He brought her tea, helped her walk, and listened to her stories. Emma shared her drawings, her thoughts, and her quiet hopes. They laughed softly and sat in silence. They didn't need to explain everything. They just needed to be present. The critical moment had passed, but its meaning stayed. It was not loud or dramatic. It was simple, gentle, and true. It was the moment when two people saw each other clearly for the first time. And from that moment, everything began to change. Chapter 5. The Discovery. After the hospital meeting, something changed in both of them. Lucas van der Meer, who had spent years living in silence, began to step outside more often. He walked through the city with new eyes. The streets he had passed many times now felt different. He noticed the colors of the buildings, the sound of bicycles, and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery near the canal. He didn't rush. He took his time. He even started visiting the library not just for work, but to sit and read. He felt lighter, as if something inside him had opened. Emma Reynolds also felt a shift. Her hands, which had struggled to draw for months, now moved with ease. She filled her sketchbook with new ideas, animals, trees, stars, and quiet places. Her drawings had more life, more feeling. She smiled more often and spent longer hours at her desk. She walked through the city with her sketchbook in her bag, ready to stop and draw whenever something caught her eye. She visited the library, the park, and the canal. She didn't feel lost anymore. They began to spend time together. At first, it was simple. A walk through the city. A coffee at the small cafe near the library. A visit to the art exhibit where Emma had first seen Lucas's work. They talked about books, buildings, and childhood memories. Lucas shared stories about his wife, not with sadness, but with warmth. Emma listened and felt honored. She shared stories about her move to Utrecht, her love for drawing, and her quiet hope to find meaning again. Lucas listened and felt connected. They discovered small things about each other that felt important. Lucas liked old jazz records. Emma had a collection of vintage postcards. Lucas had once dreamed of designing a school shaped like a tree. Emma had once drawn a tree with windows and doors. They laughed at the coincidences, but deep inside, they knew it was more than chance. One afternoon, they sat by the canal and talked about the past. Lucas said he had found a note in a book that helped him during a dark time. Emma said she had written many notes like that, hoping someone would read them. They realized it was her note. The one that said, "Even the smallest light can guide you through the darkest room." Lucas took the note from his wallet and showed it to her. Emma touched the paper and smiled. It was a moment of quiet magic. They began to see how their lives had been connected for a long time. Lucas had walked past Emma's apartment many times without knowing. Emma had drawn pictures that matched Lucas's designs without ever seeing them. They had shared the same city, the same library, the same streets. They had left signs for each other without knowing. It was not random. It was quiet, slow, and real. Lucas felt like he had found something he didn't know he was missing. Emma felt like she had returned to a part of herself that had been waiting. They didn't talk about love. They didn't make promises. But they felt safe with each other. They felt seen. They felt understood. They continued to meet. Sometimes they walked in silence. Sometimes they shared stories. Sometimes they just sat and watched the water. They didn't need to explain everything. They just needed to be there. The discovery was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was soft and gentle. It was the moment when two people realized they had been walking toward each other for years. Not with maps, but with feelings. Not with plans, but with hope. They hadn't searched for each other. But fate had brought them together at the right moment. And now, they were ready to move forward. Not alone, but together. Chapter 6. The Price of Awareness. Months passed quietly in Utrecht. The city changed with the seasons, and so did Lucas and Emma. Their lives began to move together, slowly and gently. They didn't rush into anything. They didn't try to name what they were feeling. But they both knew something real had grown between them. It was not loud or dramatic. It was calm, steady, and full of meaning. Lucas van der Meer started to smile more often. His steps became lighter, and his thoughts less heavy. He still worked as an architect, but now he added small details to his designs that reminded him of Emma's drawings. He placed benches near windows, added soft curves to walls, and used warm colors in his sketches. He didn't do it for clients. He did it because it felt right. He spent more time outside, walking through the city, watching the light change on the canal. He no longer felt alone in the world. Emma Reynolds also changed. Her drawings became brighter, more playful, and full of life. She started working on a new book, one that told a story about two people who found each other through quiet signs. She didn't use their real names, but the feelings were true. She felt more confident, more open. She began teaching art to children at the library, helping them find joy in simple lines and colors. She no longer felt lost in her work. She felt connected. They met often, sometimes in the morning for coffee, sometimes in the evening for a walk. They didn't need to talk all the time. Sometimes they just sat together in silence, watching the water or listening to the wind. They shared stories from their past, but they didn't try to fix each other. They simply listened. Lucas talked about his wife, about the pain and the healing. Emma talked about her move to Utrecht, about her fears and hopes. They didn't judge. They understood. They began to notice how many signs had led them to each other. The notes in books, the drawings on walls, the quiet moments in the library. They remembered the accident, the hospital, the first time they saw each other clearly. They realized that their lives had been connected long before they met. The invisible strings had always been there, pulling them closer, waiting for the right moment. Lucas once said that buildings are like people. They carry stories in their walls, and sometimes those stories need time to be heard. Emma agreed. She said that drawings are like feelings. They don't always make sense at first, but they speak when you're ready to listen. They both believed that life is full of signs, but most people are too busy to notice. They had learned to pay attention. They didn't try to change the world. They didn't start a movement or write a book about their story. But they changed their own lives. They became more aware, more present, more grateful. They learned that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it comes quietly, through small steps and soft moments. Sometimes it grows in silence. They also learned that awareness has a price. It means seeing things you didn't see before. It means feeling more deeply, caring more honestly, and risking more openly. It means accepting that life is not perfect, but it can be beautiful. Lucas and Emma accepted that price. They didn't run from it. They embraced it. They continued to live their lives, side by side. They didn't make promises about forever. They didn't need to. They simply chose each other every day. They chose kindness, patience, and truth. They chose to believe in the quiet power of connection. Moral: sometimes what we search for is closer than we think. Invisible strings connect us to people who can change our lives. We just need to be open, aware, and ready to accept what seems random. Because in the random, we often find what is truly meant. And when we do, we must be brave enough to follow it. Even if the path is quiet. Even if the signs are small. Because those small signs can lead to something real. Something lasting. Something worth everything. Thank you for your attention. If you like the story, please like and subscribe. It motivates us to make new videos and helps us promote the channel. Thank you.